vision.
Thank you, Frauke. Yes, so let's get started. Let's see how this body of work over the last 50 years on Aldabra can help regional efforts. So a quick history lesson. So giant tortoises were once widespread across the Western Indian Ocean and other parts of the world, namely Reunion, Mauritius, Rodrigues, the inner islands of the Seychelles, all had their own endemic species. But unfortunately for the tortoises, they had several traits which almost predetermined them to exploitation and extinction, namely their large size and relative ease of catching them, the fact that they can survive a long time without food and water, and then probably most crucially, they apparently taste delicious. So they were doomed to be exploited. And you can see there's a Valdivia expedition, a German vessel in the 1800s. I think they picked their tortoises up from Mahe, actually. Okay. So the early research, so when the research station was built, it really facilitated the construction of the study of the basic biology, ecology, and behavior of the tortoises. There's a photograph here of Jack Frazier, who Cheryl mentioned. He also did his thesis on the tortoises. And I mentioned that because his thesis was actually referenced quite a lot in the early days and used by a lot of people. We've got photographs here. The rest of the photographs are Ian Swingland's, so you can see Ian dissecting a tortoise there, rather crudely. And then that's him weighing a tortoise with two Aldabra legends, Harry Charles and Bernard Leguet. So some of the crucial names in this early period are Ian, then there was Julia Hamilton. Sorry, I forgot his names. Gone blank. So some of those early people, we'll move on. I'm sorry, I forgot their names. David Bourne and Malcolm Coe. I knew I'd mess that up. So, and these people really defined the population structure, the size, recruitment, feeding ecology, and their movements, and really laid the groundwork for when we move forward to the 21st century. And that work was really supplemented with advances in technology and lab techniques. So it was really looking at the same things, but using technological advancements to find and delve further deep. So movement studies, just like Cheryl's been tagging turtles, Rich Baxter and Dennis Hansen from the University of Zurich really did some interesting work tagging the turtles with GPSs, and they had accelerometers and temperature gauges, so you could really get fine-scale movement studies, and there's some rangers tracking them there because they had to be tracked down to have their data downloaded. And then also with the advent of DNA analysis, it's really helped to understand the genetic diversity within the population, which we'll come back to shortly. And then SIF, of course, has continued this long-term monitoring. One thing that's recently started is the expansion of capture mark recapture programs. So that was started in the 70s. I think that David Bourne started doing tagging of that, and then the Zurich team started expanding that on Picard, and now we've moved to Southeast Grand Terre, where we're pit tagging a lot of tortoises, which is a small little transponder that we put in them that has a unique number. And so 2 or 3 times a year, we do what we call sweep surveys across Picard and Southeast Grand Terre, where we move through a predetermined area and collect morphometric data on all the tortoises within this area. And from that, we get a snapshot of the sort of size distribution of the tortoises, their sex ratios, so just seeing how the population is doing. And then beyond that, we also work to actually calculate the total population of the atoll, which you think with tortoises being large, slow-moving, it would be easy to do, but the atoll is incredibly large. But we walk 18 of these transects, many of which I think were constructed or cut in the Royal Society days. So some of you that were back there will recognize, certainly St. Casgroves, I think that's been there a very long time. So nowadays we're using a fancy algorithm, distance modeling, whereby rangers walk the transects and measure the distance of the tortoises from the transect that they come across, and then that can be extrapolated out using the algorithm to create a population estimate. But unfortunately, I think we're still a bit coarse. It's about, our estimates are 80,000 to 200,000, I think. Cheryl looked at that. So we've still got a bit of work to do, and that's going to be a priority for SIF moving forward. So these populations, they used to be widespread across the Western Indian Ocean. So in the early 2000s, to replace these species that went extinct across the Mascarenes in the inner island of the Seychelles, there was a movement to use the Aldabra giant tortoises that just clung on Aldabra as a proxy species. So one of the largest populations outside, if not the largest population outside Aldabra now, is on Frigga Island in the inner islands of the Seychelles. I think there's about 2,500 there. Curios Island in Seychelles, there's about 200 or 300, I think, and David Stoddart, I think, was part of those translocations in the 1980s. In Mauritius, we've got Round Island, where this photograph is taken. You can see a nice little hatching. There's about 1,000 on Round Island now. There's a small breeding population on Îles Aigrettes, and they're all managed by the Mauritian Wildlife Foundation. And the same on Rodrigues. They're doing a really great restoration project there. And there's so many more planned. This is going to be expanding to Madagascar, and I think in the Seychelles themselves, there's more. So there's so much going on, and that's why this body of work that's been going on for Aldabra for the last 50 years is so crucial, because we understand what habitat they need to survive and thrive. So studies from the last 50 years have shown that grassland and grazing on grassland is their primary diet. So it's so important for these rewilded sites to have that, but also shade. Like they, of course they need to eat, but because they're ectotherms and can't thermoregulate, they have to avoid the midday sun because they will simply overheat and cook. And then they can survive a very long time without water, but like all of us, they do need to drink. And it's crucial that they have enough, because that, we'll see in a minute, really affects population viability. And also other like habitat considerations that managers for rewilded populations need to take into account is actually nest sites, because they dig down and nest in the soil. And I know some papers have shown that on Malabar Island, on Aldabra, that the limiting factor on recruitment is actually nest site availability. So all these factors that people need to take into account, and we have the research to show it. And then crucially, part of rewilding is the whole sort of idea of hands-off management. So to have truly viable populations, first of all, we need enough genetic variation in the rewilded populations for them to be self-sustaining moving forward. So there's research right now going on by Guzda Chilingir, I think, who's got a poster in the room, and she's trying to do a genomics level study of the Aldabra population and then compare that with rewilded populations and see if the diversity is represented elsewhere. And then, of course, reproduction is crucial to recruitment and viable populations. So I know Ian did a paper in the 70s that looked at the effect of low rainfall on clutch size, egg size, and recruitment. And in those periods of drought, it actually affected all of those and reduced them. So these are considerations that there needs to be the resources to sustain populations and reproduction moving forward so that recruitment can continue unimpeded. And then, of course, restoration. Many of these islands that have lost tortoises, they had them. The whole ecosystem can be re-engineered and reconstructed using the tortoises themselves. As you can see, this was taken on Aldabra, but they really changed the forest structure by browsing for the branches and like reduce this low cover, and then you can just see a bit of the famous tortoise turf where they graze it down to almost a Gulf Coast green. And they're also incredible seed dispersers. So I think there's been studies, 2 or 3 over the last 50 years on Aldabra that's shown gut retention times, and I think on average it's about 15 days. So like, although they don't always move too far, they can move these seeds and give them a good head start by dropping them in a nice bit of mulch and fertilizer. And then the nutrient cycling themselves, studies have shown that the biomass of the tortoises on Aldabra far exceeds like ungulate herbivores in continental Africa. So they can really exist in high densities and help to restore these populations where they've been lost. But of course, as all our lives, climate change are things that really need to be taken into account with these rewilded populations. On Aldabra, the study's shown that drought frequency is actually increasing, and also duration. So as we've seen with water is crucial to drive in reproductive processes, and not just the health of the alive individuals, but the reproductive processes. And then with thermal regime shifting, Wilfredo Falcon, someone from University of Zurich, he showed that activity for the tortoises above 32 degrees really plummets, and at about 36 degrees, it's 0. So for conservation managers in the region, trying to project what the thermal regimes will be in the future is really important, and maybe through sort of interventionist things, mitigation by more shady areas, we can try and delay these effects. And all of these things contribute to population viability, of course. So looking forwards, we were talking about how Aldabra is going to affect the region, but really what we need to be thinking in the future, especially like these larger populations that are really coming online, such as Frigate Island and Round Island, is how they can inform Aldabra and their population structure, size, sex ratios. Because Aldabra is actually far from pristine, unfortunately. It still has rats. Goats were only eradicated 10 years ago. So it's important we can learn lessons from these other sites as they come online to inform the actual restoration of Aldabra. Thank you very much. I will just say, none of the beautiful photographs are mine. They were Martin Van Rooyen's and Marcus Roche's, but they distracted well.